I'm Phil Taylor, and this is the preview episode for the Backstage Pastors Podcast, brought to you by the Church Hub. My co-host, Tyler Drewitz, is with me as well, and what we're going to do today is just give you a little bit of a preview of our podcast here, the Backstage Pastors Podcast. We're going to talk about what is this thing, what are we trying to accomplish. We'll help you get to know a little bit about who myself and Tyler are as your hosts, and we'll talk about really kind of what we're excited about for this new podcast.
So one of the first questions you might have is, what is the Backstage Pastors Podcast, and why in the world do we need another leadership podcast, especially one focused on pastors?
Yeah, it's a valid question, Tyler, and I don't know about you, but I love podcasts. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I subscribe to like probably 15 or 20 different podcasts. And, I definitely ask myself, like, why bother doing another one? And I think for me, the biggest reason is to be able to create content and host conversations that are really targeted for the executive pastor, or to use Mike Bonham's language, the second chair leaders in the church in general, and maybe even nonprofit organizations, but definitely not pastors in general. So really kind of zooming in on the executive pastor, the executive director, and kind of making sure that whatever we're doing has them in mind. I think there are really great podcasts out there, really great leadership podcasts out there, but I can't find one that claims to be for executive pastors specifically. There was one that popped up a few years ago. They had like 3 episodes, and then it sort of disappeared and it never happened again. And I don't know. The web domain is dead, so who knows what's going on there. But this content really is focused on second chair leaders in the church and nonprofit spaces, executive pastors, executive directors. Maybe an LP, lead pastor, who doesn't have an executive pastor might also benefit from some of these episodes that we'll be doing, but it really is second chair focused.
So then, it sounds like an important topic. It sounds like, even as we know, executive pastors are doing some really important work in the church. And so how does this not already exist? I just don't get it.
I know, right? It doesn't make any sense to me either. And my guess is that, that I wrote a book called Defining the Executive Pastor Role a number of years ago. First wrote it 10 years ago, part of my Backstage Pastors series of books, which is where we get the title for this podcast from. But when I was writing that book, I met with a number of publishers and talked to them about my idea for this book for executive pastors. And every single publisher said to me, well, what if we take these great concepts that you've got, and what if we just sort of like expand them and we talk to pastors in general? You're like, let's not limit it to executive pastors. Let's talk to campus pastors and youth pastors and lead pastors, and just expand it. All the concepts are transferable after all. And I said, yeah, but guys, listen, like if we do that, then there won't be anything out there that is targeted at XPs. There's not much out there. I should say not much. There's a couple of books, Mike Bonham's most noticeably. But I just really, for me, I just said, no, I'm willing to sell fewer books and have it be really targeted at a specific group of people. I'm okay with that. I'm all right with it. Selling fewer books. I'm all right with this podcast getting fewer listens because we're focused on those second chair leaders. And so I think that that's probably why it doesn't exist, because everybody tries to do a general leadership podcast to cast as wide a net as possible, probably for monetization purposes and ad revenue and all that kind of stuff. And that's just not where I am.
Yeah, that's fair. I think one of the things that I really appreciate about this podcast we're going to be starting here is that it's being hosted by a couple of guys who have some experience in this area, the second chair leader area, this executive pastor kind of area. And so I figured let's take a minute and talk about sort of who we are and why we'd even step into hosting this podcast.
Great.
So for myself personally, I'll level with you. I don't have a huge network or decades of ministry connections. I'm more of a introvert. When you go to conferences and all of that, you'd probably see me off in the corner or somewhere with my lead pastor, and that's kind of my style. And most days I've just got my head down, doing the work, serving the churches the best I can. I've got a few different roles that I fill. So first, I'm the executive pastor and one of the original planters of Formation Church in the Salt Lake City area. I also run myxp.church, where we help pastors solve real operational and financial challenges by acting as remote executive pastors for about 30 churches around the country. And then just over a year ago, because I didn't have enough going on, I decided to co-found Ridgeline Printing with another pastor and longtime friend, because we were just so tired of seeing the church get taken advantage of in terms of pricing and quality and things like that on custom apparel, printing, and signage. And so all that to say, my world is full of problems to solve, pastor support, and details to matter for the health and effectiveness of the church.
Well, I think it's funny, Tyler, that you say you don't have decades of ministry connections, because you do have decades of ministry experience.
And I didn't talk to many people.
Well, but you're serving so many churches right now through myxp.church and through Ridgeline Printing. And so I think actually your impact is pretty significant.
Thank you.
That's why I wanted to do this with you. But yeah, so for me, I spent 20 years as an executive pastor. Actually, I started as a lead pastor and then shifted into the executive pastor role.
We're going to have to talk about that at some point.
We definitely will, and I definitely talk about it in the book as well. But for me, very early in the executive pastor role, I found myself pulling together other executive pastors from around my geography area where I was serving, and I started just looking for ways to serve executive pastors, whether it was like doing a breakout at a church planter conference, the network that I was a part of, or whether it was just I'd hear that a pastor friend hired an executive pastor, and I would reach out and say, hey, if you want to grab a call, let's talk. And I just found myself doing a lot of that. And over time, it became really clear that God had put a book on my heart. And so I wrote Defining the Executive Pastor Role about 10 years ago, and then I updated it last year and added a few chapters to it. I started doing a lot of coaching and began leading cohorts of 10 to 15 pastors at a time, executive pastors, and started doing more teaching at events. And over time, I just realized I have a real passion for serving executive pastors. And that's ultimately why we're now doing this podcast. After serving as a pastor for 20 years, I ended up shifting kind of my focus to say, rather than serving one church with 80% of my time and serving lots of churches with 20% of my time, what if I flip that and I say, let me put 80% of my time into serving lots of churches and 10, 15, 20% of my time into my local church. And so that's kind of how I live my life now. In addition to the coaching and the cohorts and this podcast and writing, I also actually work full-time with a company called Plain Joe Studios, which helps churches tell their story through spaces, through branding, through naming. So we're often going in and doing a master plan on a church or helping them rethink their kids ministry spaces. In fact, we just worked with your church, Tyler. You guys got that new building there in Salt Lake City, and our team came in and helped you kind of create a master plan for how to use it. And so we do that with a lot of churches all over the United States and Canada. We work with a lot of nonprofits, Christian schools, colleges, really anywhere where a story needs to be told. That's kind of what we're doing. And so I spend a lot of my time doing that. And then all the kind of coaching and everything, all that sort of feeds each other and kind of helps each other out. And then more recently, I've gotten involved in this thing called the Church Hub, which is a unique kind of a thing, which we'll talk about a little bit more later on.
Perfect. Now, I know you mentioned this, you alluded to it anyway earlier, but can you give us a little bit more information? Where does this idea, the Backstage Pastors, come from, that name and just the kind of whole mentality?
Yeah. So, when I was in college, I had a great group of college roommates, and I went to a Bible college in Philadelphia. And one year during spring break, we had all decided to go to where my parents lived, which is near Boston, and we crashed it at my house, and we were kind of just being tourists in the Boston area. And we heard about the fact that you could get like last minute tickets to like expensive plays for like super cheap. And so, we were all kind of a little bit like people who enjoyed literature and artsy kind of things. And so we go to this play and we're watching this play, right? We get like last minute tickets. We're like front row center and super cheap college tickets. And we're watching it, and I'm watching all of this, spectacle take place before me. And what I keep thinking in the back of my mind is someone is backstage making all this happen. Like, here's this crazy thing happening before me. And yet, like, behind the scenes, I'm sure there's just a beehive of activity making this play happen before us. And I started thinking, like, I think the church would be more effective if the people who are primarily on stage, like the lead pastor, preaching pastor, worship pastor, if there were people metaphorically backstage making all of that happen. So like I started thinking about a lot of the lead pastors that I knew were like really good at preaching, but terrible at administrating, right? Or they would be like really good at casting vision, but really had no idea how to bring that vision into reality, right? One of our guests that we'll have in a later episode, we'll talk about the idea that lead pastors often know step 1, step 100, and executive pastors know step 2 to 99.
For sure.
And so that idea of you've got these front stage pastors, but then you need these backstage pastors just kind of gripped me and became kind of the brand, the story for what we're doing here and what I do through my book series and all of it. So backstagepastors.org is all of that. And so that's become, really the huge focus of my life. It's where I've invested my life is sort of coming alongside of pastors and leaders and helping them bring vision into reality. And most of the time, no one knows the people that are behind the scenes. And that's okay. We don't need our names up in lights, but we do need to be resourced. And that's the goal here for our time.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like we're both, qualified to lead this podcast, whatever
We've got some experience.
Yeah, exactly. We've been doing some things. I think every once in a while I come across a podcast from a ministry leader who's been in the role for a month and a half, and I feel like, all right, this is going to be fascinating, right?
Yeah.
And so
you've got
at
so
least
much
that's
to
not
share.
our story, so we've got that going for us. But what are you actually excited about? Like, what are you looking forward to? Clearly, we both have a lot going on. So why are you willing to put any time into this?
Yeah, I mean, my schedule's packed. I'm on the road a lot. But here's the thing. I talk to great pastors and leaders all week long for, Plain Joe Studios or for Backstage Pastors, or just because after 25 years in ministry, I've built up a lot of relationships with some really gifted people. And so I'll be talking to a pastor about something, maybe a project we're doing together, and I'll find out, some really cool thing that they're involved in or some really cool thing they're doing at their church. I realize that they're an expert in a particular area. And I'll think to myself, I wish I could like capture this conversation and just share it with like every executive pastor I know. I think to myself, I wish I had a place where I could do that. I often tell myself I'm going to write an article about it. But that never happens,
Yeah.
it just doesn't seem to, the time to sit down and write that article never happens. And so I'm one of those guys that tends to connect with a lot of people. I'm not actually sure how it happens. My kids think it's really funny, but I just end up knowing a lot of people, and I love to connect people together. Like I'm constantly, saying, "Hey, you two need to work together," and I'm always doing like the email CC or the text CC. Like, Tyler, I'm putting you in touch with my friend. Please meet him. You guys should connect on this project. That's just
for sure.
That's kind of how I live, and so I almost kind of think of like this podcast as sort of a way of doing like a global email or text CC to the entire executive pastor community, like, hey, XP community, I'm putting you in touch with my friend who runs this ministry. I think you guys would get along really well. Why don't you talk? I'll let you take it from here. Enjoy. Like that's kind of what I want this podcast to be, right? Is just a chance for the XP community to meet a lot of great leaders. And honestly, not necessarily people that are well known, right? So like in preparing for us to start this podcast, I of course looked at a lot of other podcast feeds and did some research, and what I find often is that as you kind of scroll through the list of guests, I know 90% of the names, right? Which is great. I mean, that's awesome that they've got all these people that are super well known. My hope actually is that if you were to look at our podcast feed in a couple of years and you look back through the guest list, that there would actually be a number of names that you're like, never heard of that person. But then if you actually listen to the episode, you'd be like, wow, why have I never heard of that person? Because I think there's some really great people out there doing really cool things. They just haven't written a book about it, or they don't have a platform, or they're not at a big church, or they don't have a fancy title, but they're doing really cool things that would benefit the XP community. And those are some of the people I want to introduce you to. Some of them will be well known, but probably many of them won't be. And so I'm just super excited to introduce our listeners to people that I really appreciate throughout the church and nonprofit world, and then have conversations with those people that are where the conversations are focused on the needs of second chair leaders. And so I also just feel like, at this stage in my journey, in those conversations, I have things that I want to say. The things that I'm often sharing in coaching calls one-on-one, or the things that I'm sharing in a coaching cohort 1-on-15. And every now and then I write a book or I write an article. I'm just realizing that I really desire a more public format to work those things out and to share some of the things that I feel like God has entrusted me with. I live my life with a ROI mindset. What I mean by that is that I look at my ministry career, my working career, and I say, I've got like 40 years tops to really invest for God's benefit, right? And so I think of like, how do I give God the greatest return on the investment that He has made in me and in my life? And I think that this podcast is one of the ways that I can give God a great return on the investments He's made in me. How about you, Tyler? What are you excited about?
I mean, that sounds great. I think what I'm most excited about is getting a front row seat to learn from these people who are subject matter experts. I really genuinely have always believed that the best ideas come from we, not from me, kind of that collaborative idea, tossing things back and forth and all of that. And so I'm really looking forward to sitting with these leaders, asking some good questions and growing in a ton of different areas. And honestly, that really fits the reality of being an XP. I mean, you get called on to do just about anything. As a matter of fact, in the past 3 weeks, I have done my actual role. I have served in our kids ministry, and I've sang on the worship team. And so if all I care about is the most effective way to present a spreadsheet, that's going to really narrow my ability to have effectiveness on the ministries God's entrusted me with, the people in my church, and anyone else He gives me influence over. And so, I'm really excited just to, kind of pull up a chair and figure out like, what can I learn and how can I grow?
I love it. So the podcast is launching on January 21st, 2026, God willing. Our first few episodes are already recorded. We've got Mike Bonham is going to be on our first episode. Mike wrote Leading from the Second Chair. He wrote Thriving in the Second Chair. He's a good friend. He also wrote the foreword to my book, Defining the Executive Pastor Role. And when we started working on this podcast, I knew that he needed to be our first guest, absolutely. And so I'm super excited to have him on our first episode.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, any executive pastor group that I'm in, at some point, somebody's going to ask for book recommendations, and without fail, two come. His and yours.
Thank you.
I don't know how many more there are, but those two are at least known. And so, of course, we got to talk to that guy, right? But yeah, I think that'll be great. We've got such really solid guests lined up for these first few months. We'll talk more about that in January when the show launches. You'll get a preview to what those are. But for now, let your peers, any ministry leaders, anyone else that you think might benefit from this podcast, let them know that the Backstage Pastors Podcast is coming in January 2026.
I love it. So when we start off, we're going to be monthly initially. And then we'll release on the third Wednesday of the month. That's our plan. And then once we've got enough episodes in the can, so to speak, we'll switch to twice a month. And maybe at some point we'll go weekly, but no promises on that. We both got a lot going on. So we'll try to get monthly going perfectly, and then we'll switch by twice monthly, and then maybe down the road.
It.
And we're going to start off as audio only, but after a little while, we'll switch to video once we're sort of in a good rhythm. And that way you'll be able to do it on audio or video. Tyler, I don't know if you know this, but apparently video podcasting is like the future of podcasting. I don't get it. Phil, I don't want to listen. I don't want to watch podcasts, but people seem to want to watch them. I don't know.
I just find that I'm getting a little bit older. I found myself at a convenience store in the mood to pick up a candy bar, and I'll never forget. I looked at it and thought, I remember being young and candy bars were 50 cents. And I vividly remember that same conversation with grandparents. So I appreciate that that's the future. Right? I'm not going to question it because no one is looking to me for the future cutting edge ideas. So we'll just go with what it is, right? But I think for now, let's give out our contact info and then shut the episode down, right? So how can people reach out to you, sir?
All right. So I'm at phil@backstagepastors.org. If you want to follow me on social media, it's Phil Taylor XP.
Awesome. And I am Tyler at myxp.church. That's myxp.church. And you can find me by searching my name, Tyler Drewitz, on social media. There's not a lot of them.
There we go. The Backstage Pastors Podcast is brought to you by the Church Hub. The Church Hub is a group of pastors, ministry leaders, and their spouses serving other pastors, ministry leaders, and spouses through equipping and training resources. You can check out the Church Hub at thechurchhub.org. Our theme music was written by Seth Kay, and our podcast is produced by the Good Podcast Company. Special thanks to Plain Joe Studios for giving me the time to record this show. You can check out our work at plainjoestudios.com. Tyler, I'll see you in January.
Sounds good, Phil. Talk to you soon.